Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to ask you now to, it's dark, so it's perfect. Close your eyes for a second and try to imagine every single person on this beautiful planet that we live on without illness, without poverty, without wars, without hunger, and all of this in harmony with nature. You can now open your eyes. Was that hard? It's tough, right? What if I told you that 3 years ago, the leaders of each one of the 192 nations on this planet came together and agreed on achieving just that? They basically agreed that by 2030, we will pretty much achieve all of this. And basically, this is every single one of the leaders of our nations right now, including Canada. And to achieve these seemingly unachievable goals, they've asked every single one of us to commit to supporting them. That includes government, business, NGOs, youth group, women's group, workers group, and all of the other organized groups that you can imagine, which from now on I will call the non-state actors. Working at the UN, we have the government, and then we have the non-state actors. So we'll differentiate between those because there's a real important role for them. And why? The insiders to these negotiations like me, we estimate that 30% of these goals and targets came directly from people like you and me and these very non-state actors. And because we were able to crowdsource ideas from millions of them around the planet that prior to this time had never been asked, what is it that the world that we want should look like? So the government valued these input and basically have asked us to do all of this. And for the first time in history, and this is true, think about this, for the first time in history, we have one set of universal goals that we all need to reach, that leave no one of us behind, and that uphold our human rights. And so the question is then, what is it that we can all do? And this is what I want to get at today. My personal commitment are twofold. I'm committing to SDG 5, which is gender equality and economic empowerment of women, as well as SDG 10, which is reducing inequality between and across countries. And it so happened that these were actually the hardest one for our government to come to consensus about. So basically, these goals, and our people are aligning around them, and all of the stakeholders are aligning around them, because they're pragmatic. What it is, you can imagine, it's like a roadmap with a vision of where we want to go by 2030, with a bunch of routes to get there that help us collude and come together as people-centered partnership to get there. And we're not alone to do that. There are champions in each of our institutions and government and business and NGOs and think tank out there and university that are actually just trying to do that and need our support to do that. They also have legitimacy beyond political commitment because of that very participatory process that we use to achieve them. And actually, there's a lot of political commitment towards them. So far, 3 years in, we have 80 countries that have come forward and done their national voluntary reviews to prioritize the SDGs their country is going to focus on with their citizen and non-state actors at the table, and then came to the UN and presented those to share with the rest of the world and make sure that we are held accountable, and that includes our country, Canada. So at this point, you're wondering, you're looking at me and you're like, was she under the planet for the last 2 years? Or did she just wake up from amnesia? This is not what we're seeing in the headlines in the newspapers, right? So I did not just wake up from amnesia, but political changes and development, and especially political development, is very nonlinear to get back to the theme of today. And the annual report that the UN prepared every year to see the progress we're making on achieving this goal is pretty much mixed result. We're doing a little better in terms of economics since the financial crisis. We're finally getting out of that stagnant economy that we were in and unemployment. But we're also seeing no changes or actually worsening inequalities, unemployment, climate change, ocean fisheries depletion, and biodiversity. And may I ask, loss of trust in our government and our institution. So to achieve this poverty alleviation and this development, we need to basically take into account the reason why we have this lingering and very lively debate right now about trade and globalization. Who has heard about NAFTA? Yeah. If I've had ask an audience like this 10 years ago, who have heard of NAFTA? Or in the US, who's heard of NAFTA? I can guarantee you very few people would have. We kind of let those economic international agreements, like we can't really affect those. They're out there and we have no power over them. And that is the major mistake we've made. So basically, we are seeing a lot of debate as to whether trade and globalization has created unequal access to economic growth. That is, has it created opportunity for some of us at the expenses of the others? And we at UNCTAD, where I work, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, say that's the wrong question. It is not trade or globalization that leave people behind and create inequality. It is the lack of policies that are not put in place, that are recommended in basic Trade 101 classes that we take right here at McDonald College, that says that trade does not create, trade will increase growth, but it will not distribute this growth equally. There will be losers and gainers. And this is basic economic theory. Trade will widen the gap between the low and high skilled workers, giving more opportunity to skilled workers, suppress wages growth for workers facing overseas competition, and create hardship and displacement for those who lose their job. Trade agreements are based on some losing and some having competitive advantage in certain sectors and gaining in those and losing in others, and those people will lose their job. But we know that. So what we need is to put in place policies to ensure that we support and protect and realign those that will lose from these trade agreements. However, what's happened is since the 1980s, what we have seen is a mantra that the economy will fare much better than our government. We should have the minimum intervention from our government. And therefore, at the same time that trade and globalization were intensifying with more and more trade agreements, more and more investment agreements, we have basically a lot of our government, and thank God, not Canada, and that's why our middle class is still intact, as well as some of our other institutions. Many of these governments have withdrawn from the very social policies that we are recommended to put in place. On top of it, they remove social services. And on top of it, as a result of the financial crisis, they put in place austerity measures. And guess what? Who lose the most from austerity measures? The poorest and the women. And therefore, it is no surprise that by letting the market just on its own and not having our government intervene, we are seeing excessive inequalities. And inequalities is very, very real. Just to give one statistics, the total growth that was created between 1980 and now, 13% was captured by the bottom 50% of the income earners on the planet. While the top 1% of income earners have captured 26%. That is twice as much as the bottom 50%. So 1% captured twice as much as the bottom 50% of earners. And it's not only individual. What's happened is multinational corporations have been able to take advantage of these international economic treaties to maximize their profit. That's what corporations do. That's nothing abnormal about that. What they've done is they use these treaties to use international competition between workers to lower wages by relocating some factories in the South, and between government to lower the taxes that they pay. So fishing for the lowest taxation jurisdiction. Creative accounting to shift profit to where the taxes are lowest, and also buying competition, so they have complete concentration of power. And why is this important? Because the excessive inequalities is pretty much increasing the feeling of unfairness that we all feel, and especially those that lose their job and tend to lose through these processes, which erode our social cohesion, which lead to social unrest and polarization. Now, what comes to your mind? Recent election around the world where some of these disgruntled people that have been felt unanswered to, forgotten and not listened by their leaders, have voted for more populist government that tried to give them an easy solution to what they're seeing in the decreasing in their quality of living and their standard of living and that of their children. Now the question is, why our government are not intervening then? Since it's so clear that we should intervene and have these policies and reform those economic treaties that do lead to inequality without policies. And the answer, unfortunately, is that concentration of power of individual and wealth of individual leads to a vicious cycle of concentration in power that can then be used to further increase wealth by influencing the policies at the advantage of the top 1% and at the expense of the majority of people. So the question is what we do. Do you feel powerless about this? Most of us do, but we're not. None of us can fix everything, but every one of us can do something. And what I want to do is to go through some of these things that we all can do. And I just sidelines to say that the reason why it's important, because let's face it, people in this audience, you and me, we are the elite. We are the educated elite that basically often can tend to point the fingers at the people that elected those populist government. But really, we're only going to achieve a change if we work with these people. They are not the enemy. They are the people left behind by the very policy that we've not engaged into. And this is threatening the multilateral system that was created after World War II to ensure that we don't go into other wars at the very time where we need more solidarity and support each other if we want to achieve these goals. So we have two choices. We either let these trade wars escalate and then everyone lose. Just look at any trade book, just Google it. Nobody wins on the trade war. Or we basically take our courage in our hand and look at ways that we can actually change the system. Why? We have a great opportunity. We have a great window of opportunity to make these changes because they're already undergoing. These very people that are losing from these international treaties and the trade and globalization the way they are right now are basically challenging this very multilateral system. So let's pick this opportunity and change it while it's been challenged. So basically what I want to do, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to cut here. We have the goals, right? The SDGs have been agreed by all our government, and we have a mandate, and all we need to do is to come together and find ways through individual and joint action to get there. And we're not alone. As I told you, there are champions in every one of our organizations to get there. So what I want to do is quickly go to some of these individual actions and some of these joint action that we can do. The first one and the most important one, and here in Quebec, we're very privileged that we have social and solidarity economy institutions, such as the Fonds de Travailleurs du Québec and the Fonds de Pension du Québec, et Placement du Québec. These funds, in most countries, do not exist to take our pension and reinvest them in the very social economy and job creation that we need. And so a lot of the world is now looking at us as a good example of how to do this. But also we have our own income and our own saving that we need to invest. And we need to ask questions as to where do we invest this money? Which company do we want to support? Because that's the way we're going to transform this model. And it's already undergoing. I want to give you a quick statistics that $27 trillion of wealth will be transferred between now and 2030 to the millennial, the Generation X, those of you here, lucky you, and widows women. That means two-thirds of the wealth on the planet will be owned by women by 2030. Why is this important? Do you think that the millennials act just like us? Most of you are millennial. Do you act like us?
No, you're purpose-driven. You want to know that your money is doing good as well as bringing you return. And the same for women is true. And this is changing the way these financial advisors are basically have to review their business model. Why? As within 1 year of the husband dying, women fire their financial advisors. So the model's got to change because they are not speaking to them about what their heart wants as well as the head. And that connection between the heart and the head needs to be made. And this is where this is a great opportunity for us to push. We also should give more money to human rights and environmental and social movement. In the US, there was an upsurge of a fund being given to those groups. Why? Because they're pretty much the only one at this point that go and fight on the Hills and in Ottawa to basically ensure that the policies that are being debated favor the majority and the social justice as opposed to the 1%. We should also subscribe to newspapers that deliver real news, as well as scientific journals, as well as our National Academies of Science. Let's face it, science is under threat. We need to support the real fact, and we need to fight against alternative facts. You can also get involved in your community. You know, we all get excited or maybe brace against these provincial and federal elections. I live in New York, so I was a little protected against the debate here. But, you know, what about local representative? We have way more influence on our local representative than we have at the provincial or federal level. And in Quebec, in Canada alone, both Guelph and the borough of Mont-Royal have what is called participatory budget. That means citizens are actually asked through this process, where should we allocate the money? Where are the priorities? Where should we invest? On the road or in education or in the library? And this is the type of thing that we need to get to. If you don't want to get involved directly, just give to the organization that support those groups. They're called the Participatory Budgetary Process Group. And then budgeting project. And they pretty much support projects like this across Canada and the US. We can also change our consumption pattern. We need to vote with our dollars when we buy. And we just had a colleague speak about our suits. The textile industry and the luxury industry is hugely has a huge environmental impact. Let's buy from the companies that are women-owned, that are minority-owned, and that actually take care of the environment in their process. And this is supported by the change in the investment I was talking about. We also can continue to do our good old 3 Rs. Reduce the consumption, reuse what we have, and basically recycle and ask that our company do the same. I personally committed to biking to work, eat less meat, and basically I buy my basket of community-supported agriculture every week so I can support sustainable agriculture while benefiting my health and achieving 2 of the goals. But I've also committed, you can commit to one of the goals, choose one. I've committed personally with some of my colleagues and friends to channel investment and capacity in science, technology, engineering, and math for women so that they can capture the opportunity, the trillions of business of opportunity that will be created to achieve the SDGs between now and 2030. So our moonshot is that women earn 30% of the wealth that will be created between now and 2030 in achieving the SDGs. So you can do the same. Now we get to the hard part, the joint and the multilateral action that we can take. So this is not easy, but transformational changes is needed. Business as usual will not get us there. We at UNCTAD, where I work, are calling for a new global deal. Remember the New Deal? So we need a new global deal to create jobs. We have the unprecedented level of unemployment around the world, and peace cannot be achieved with young people without jobs. We need to look at the relink wages with the productivity of labor. We need to re-empower our labor groups and our working, and the other groups that I mentioned earlier, the women's group, the NGO groups, and others. We need to reform our treaties, and the tax treaties, the investment treaty, and the trade treaty. Now you're telling me this is kind of pie. This can't be achieved. Well, let me give you a few examples of what is already happening. South Africa, Colombia, and other countries have already rejected this model, reformed their investment model so that they can regain the capacity to put in place the policy that they need for the just and environmentally sustainable development of their countries, because they were being sued by multinational corporations that invested in their country, because they were now asking that company have a ownership that is South African by the black population, so that they could actually, after apartheid, reduce inequality. And they were threatened to be sued under this, and they basically just reject the model. So there's a process already ongoing to reform those models, those investment models. And then right here in North America, we have an opportunity. And I, as a former NAFTA employee, can't believe we're not grabbing this missed opportunity. We have President Trump's administration pushing for weakening that very clause in our trade agreement, started with NAFTA, that basically allow multinational corporations to sue our government for putting in place sometime legitimate environmental and social policies. Where are we? Why are we not supporting that? Our negotiators in Canada had put at the beginning of the negotiation that we should, as we reopen NAFTA, let's take the opportunities to align them with the SDGs. That was rejected. Why are we not, again, getting together, supporting the groups, the environmental, the development groups, and the social justice group out there that could be speaking and making sure that we give the champion within our government the ability to make the changes that we need and rebalance the power of our government with the multinationals. We need these grassroots organizers, and we need to return to this participatory process. There's another opportunities happening at the very UN where I work. We're undergoing a major reform at the UN, so we're better fit to help government implement the SDGs. And as part of that reform, we should have people like you around the world pushing for this, to come back to this very participatory process and crowdsourcing of ideas so that your voice are heard in all of these international processes, just the way we did it to achieve the SDGs in 2015. So in conclusion, what I want to leave with you is I am, and in case you haven't noticed, unapologetic enthusiast. I do believe that we have the capacity, we have a mandate, we have the goals, we have the brain, and together with empowering those groups that can represent us and rebalance the power in these trade agreements. Right now, only multinational corporations are at the table. We need our civil society groups to be at those tables. And we also need to realize that trade is not the problem. The risk of pointing trade is that all of our nations, except for maybe 2 or 3, have developed through trade. And if we are attacking trade, we're basically telling developing countries that they don't have any more a means for developing, and that is not sustainable. We can eradicate poverty, but we need to ditch this us versus them attitude that has been pretty much dominating the narrative over the last 2 years. So, in conclusion, what I want to say is, again, none of us can solve everything, but each one of us can do something. I invite you to do this. Thank you.